Lot of updates in the Nolan Wells case. First, brand new video reportedly shows what could be the last known image of him before he disappeared. That footage, obtained by TMZ, was recorded on Horn Island just hours before he vanished. We'll get into what this could mean for the investigation. And attorney Ben Crump, who is representing Nolan Wells' family.
Brand new video reportedly shows what could be the last known image of him before he disappeared. That footage obtained returned on Horn Island just hours before he vanished. That quote is not from a court filing, it is from a broadcast, but it perfectly captures the central void in the state's timeline. On one side we have a young man standing on a boat deck, on the other side we have a body recovered days later. The space between those two fixed points is an official blank, and that blank space has now been filled with a 100,000 question.
There is this video that has surfaced that could be the last known image captured of Nolan Wells before he disappeared, before his body was ultimately found. This footage was obtained by TMZ. It was reportedly recorded on Horn Island just hours before Nolan vanished. The person who captured this on film believed this was Nolan. They felt so strongly that they went to the sheriff's office and showed it to police. Now, if this is Nolan, you might be saying, well, why, right? Why did people believe that? Well, the video...
Imagine you are holding a sealed evidence bag. Inside is not a weapon, but a single pixel. A pixel that, if shot, or an entire narrative of a tragic, accidental drowning. That is this new video. It's not high definition. It doesn't show a face. But the person holding the camera believed so strongly that this was Nolan Wells, they bypassed the tip line and went directly to the sheriff's office. Before we go deeper into what the documents actually show, make sure you're subscribed to EvidenceAxis, because we don't just cover the story, we follow the evidence.
Well, the first thing that stands out to me is, number one, it's a proof of life. If in fact that is him, then we know that he's alive at that date and that time, based on the metadata that they can pull off of that particular video. The secondary thing that jumps out at me is you have all of these other boats around him at that point. So that means you can also get the GPS data in relationship to these other individuals around him from those other boats. So that now puts him in a particular location at a particular time, and
we must establish a legal baseline before the state does. The term is proof of life. It is a cold, clinical phrase that cuts through the emotion of a grieving family. Proof of life means we have digital metadata, a date stamp, GPS coordinate that legally anchors Nolan Wells to a specific boat at a specific moment. However, the official Maryland at 4:31 p.m., yet the family's legal team insists Nolan was last seen at 3:00 p.m. We have a 68-minute gap between the last sighting and the vessel's departure. That window is not a tragedy. That window is a crime scene.
The infamous July 4th photo shows him with his friends on a boat. This footage appears to be possibly a different boat, maybe with other people. Thoughts?
Yeah,
I don't know for sure, but I'm just thinking.
No, that's a great point, because that is obviously one of the things you would want to match up in relationship to this video. You know, you look at the structure of the boat, you can tell the manufacturer of the boat, and all of those other situations. And then the other thing that this would show, let's say this new autopsy comes up with,
And this is where the visual metaphor of that single pixel collapses into a concrete investigative failure. Look at the boat in the video. Is it the vessel from the now infamous July 4th photograph with his friends? Or is it a different boat? We don't know. The video shows a man bending over a cooler on the back deck surrounded by other vessels. If it's a different boat, the fragile simply fell off theory begins to dissolve in salt water. You cannot accidentally drown on a boat you were never supposed to be on, unless someone placed you there.
Because you can argue, to your point, that you're celebrating in the water. So of course you want to leave that device, out of a water source of any type. But then again, you have a shifting in behavior here. You have a young man who goes off, potentially it's reported with a young lady, and then just vanishes. Okay. And why would he leave his phone on the boat if in fact he's supposed to leave on that boat at some point? And now later on it's discovered that he doesn't show up, and he's reported missing, but his phone is sitting there on the boat. The investigators will be able to determine rather rapidly, not only the GPS coordinates and of course all the data footprint that they'll get out of that phone, but then when you tie that into this behavioral aspect of,
they left the phone on the boat. That is the detail that cannot breathe. A young man with NFL ambitions, a role model to his siblings, leaves his phone on a boat while allegedly walking off with a young lady. It's not impossible. But the law does not run on possibilities, it runs on patterns of life. The investigator in the source footage dropped a term in list attached to every witness interview: shifting in behavior. A low-risk victim doesn't vanish because of a sudden shift in behavior. He vanishes because someone else shifted violently into his path.
More suspicious in nature.
And according to Ben Crump during a press conference last week, the DA apparently told him that once this investigation is complete, this case could be presented to a grand jury for potential criminal charges being filed. In what capacity, we wouldn't know, right? It could be, let's say, a potential homicide charge, could be something with respect to the investigation, someone not providing accurate information to law enforcement, maybe it's tampering with evidence. What do you make of that potentiality of this case being presented to a grand jury?
Well,
the district attorney has already mapped the road ahead. It leads to a grand jury. The DA didn't use the word accident. The DA used phrase potential criminal charges. That is not a leak. That is a flare. We aren't just looking at a wrongful death civil suit. We are looking at the potential for an indictment. The decision to impanel a grand jury signals that the timeline, as currently presented by certain witnesses, does not square with the forensic reality. And if you lie about a fire extinguisher or a missing hour, you commit a separate
something
felony.
To consider, pretty heavily if in fact this is a viable piece of evidence that's presented itself now.
I also think that if people see this video coming out and think, wait a minute, this person felt it was important enough to go to the sheriff's office, good on that person to do it. Like, they see this whole wide panning shot and thinking, oh my gosh, look, they found no. It makes me wonder if other people are now going to have footage and look back and be like, oh, maybe I have something too.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, absolutely.
And I know the sheriff's office has asked that for unedited photos and videos from that day, but it just made me thought of it.
Yeah, and that's obviously going to be, again, that's going to put everything back into the column of proof of life. We know that this young man is just enjoying a July 4th celebration and that there's nothing afoot.
The state will fall back on a singular defense: the water hides trauma. They will argue that any injury occurred post-mortem from tides and rocks. But the independent pathologists now have a before picture. That video from Horn Island is the control variable. If the preliminary independent autopsy, announced on the eve of an AP invention, reveals trauma inconsistent with post-mortem drift, then we have a timeline of injury. We know he was unmarked at 2:23 p.m. If the body tells a different story, someone authored that story between the last pixel and the recovery.
He was not on that island by himself. Somebody saw something and knows something. So I didn't come to make money. I came to give money. Stand up and tell the truth. Whatever it is, good or bad, we're not going to prejudge it, but we can't.
He was not on that island by himself. Somebody saw something and knows something. That audio is from the funeral service officiated by Reverend Al Sharpton. A $100,000 reward was announced, split between Sharpton's National Action Network and Tyler Perry. The moral refrain we must carry through the next phase is a specific phrase uttered at that pulpit: stand up and tut a eulogy. That is a direct appeal to break the silence of the co-defendant who may not yet know they are a co-defendant.
Great points. The one thing, obviously, that can be determined almost immediately is the microscopic findings of, anything inside of the lungs as a whole. If there's water or fluid in the body or in the airway, you can also find that, in a secondary autopsy, because there will be microscopic evidence of that. So that, number one, tells us two things. The first thing it tells us, if there is.
Here is why the rush to announce independent findings is legally aggressive, not merely public relations. The state medical examiner is waiting on toxicology. That's a 6 to 8 week minimum. Yet, Ben Crump announced a preliminary independent finding now. Why? Because a microscopic examination of lung tissue, the presence of fluid diatoms or the absence of them, can be determined within hours of the procedure. If the secondary autopsy finds no evidence of drowning, the accidental fall verdict is dead on arrival. The state would then be forced to answer for a body found in water that never inhaled water.
Fortunately, it could be a plus or a minus in a case like this, because the type of information that you would want to come forward is probably going to be a very narrow scope in relationship to if this is, foul play in any way, shape, or form. The individuals that are going to talk are probably not going to be motivated by the reward fund. However, a secondary layer of in investigations like this of individuals who are, contemplating, like you said earlier, they have video. and they just didn't want to turn it in yet because they weren't sure, or et cetera. A reward may motivate those types of people to come forward and say, hey, I didn't know if this was related. I'm sorry I held this for so long, but here it is. So that in a plus column, a reward fund could be very beneficial. But the majority of the cases that I've ever worked, reward funds, quite frankly, did not really have fruitful outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's always a plethora. There's always a potential for misinformation, false information, in high-profile cases. While I have you, can I ask you about the phone, Nolan's phone? I think that's an interesting piece of potential evidence here, that Nolan didn't have his phone with him. There's been back and forth about why that was. The idea we've heard, if he goes into the salt water, it's not abnormal for him to leave his phone like other people. But then again, if he's going off on his own to talk to potentially a young lady, why wouldn't he bring his phone with him? We know the phone reportedly was with his friends, that the family got a hold of it, finding the Life 360 app. There was an allegation that data had been deleted from the phone, and now there's going to be a mutual inspection of the phone, according to Ben Crump, both by the family's experts and the state investigators. Do you have any concern about that?
Yeah, the phone is a very interesting piece of evidence.
Criminology purists will tell you reward money contaminates a case with false confessions. That's a textbook risk. But the consultant in this case highlighted a darker truth. The people who know the objective truth here won't be motivated by cash. They are motivated by fear. The reward is a beacon for the secondary layer. The bystanders with iPhone footage they were too scared to hand over. The metadata from those civilian cameras will either corroborate or shatter the official statement that the boat left at 4:31 p.m.
with this young lady, and there's somebody over there that just doesn't like him, maybe because race is playing a role here, okay? And they get into a fight, and he falls into the water, and he subsequently drowns. Maybe he's unconscious, and this is where the secondary autopsy will be very critical to see if there's any type of physical evidence in his body, i.e. defensive wounds, et cetera, head injuries, what we call subdural hematoma, bleeds inside of the body in of itself. And that in of itself will tell us if in fact
we must entertain the dangerous hypothesis introduced by the homicide investigator that Nolan was a low-risk victim. Pool on Horn Island was not low-risk. The investigator raised the specter of a sudden altercation with a stranger, potentially motivated by bias leading to a subdural hematoma. If that independent autopsy reveals a bleed inside the skull, an injury that renders a man unconscious before he hits the water, then this wasn't negligence. This was a violent act covered by the convenient silence of the tide.
Jesse, appreciate you.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can also check us out on NBC's Peacock as well. If you want to follow me, X, Instagram, my News Nation show.
This is not a mystery novel where we close the cover and guess. The truth is buried in a specific public record. We want you to search for the public release of the preliminary findings from the independent autopsy conducted on behalf of the Wells family. Read it, then ask yourself one question in the comments below. If the physical body contradicts the passenger manifest, who on that manifest benefits from an hour of missing time? Thank you for watching EvidenceAxis. If you believe truth is a document, not a debate like this video, share it, subscribe and hit the bell. We follow the evidence.